The Black Pine National Forest stretched across hundreds of miles of untouched wilderness, a place where sunlight rarely reached the ground beneath the dense canopy. Ranger Ethan Cole had spent nearly 15 years patrolling its trails, and he thought he knew every strange sound the forest could produce. But on a cold October morning, everything changed. 3 college hikers had vanished without a trace after entering a restricted section of the park. Search teams found abandoned backpacks, scattered supplies, and deep footprints leading into the woods. Yet the tracks ended abruptly in a muddy clearing as if the hikers had simply disappeared into thin air. Ethan joined the investigation, expecting another tragic wilderness accident. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. A camera recovered from one of the backpacks contained a single corrupted video file. The footage showed the hikers laughing around a campfire before the image suddenly distorted into violent static. The recording resumed several seconds later. The hikers were gone. The campfire still burned, but someone else stood beside it. The figure looked human at first glance, wearing outdoor clothing stained with mud and leaves. Yet its posture was wrong. Its arms hung unnaturally low, and its head tilted at impossible angles. As the camera zoomed slightly, the thing smiled directly into the lens. Ethan replayed the footage repeatedly. The face looked human, but something beneath the skin seemed to be moving. Tiny ripples crawled across its cheeks like insects trapped underneath flesh. Before the video ended, the creature whispered a phrase that investigators could not fully decipher. Only 3 words were clear through the static. "Still wearing him." The footage disturbed everyone who viewed it, but officials dismissed it as a prank or a technical malfunction. Ethan was not convinced. During his years as a ranger, he had heard stories from older forest workers about a forgotten valley hidden deep beyond the marked trails. According to local legends, hunters who entered the valley sometimes returned acting strangely. They recognized family members and remembered personal details, yet something about them felt wrong. Their voices lacked emotion. Their habits changed overnight. Some disappeared again weeks later, leaving behind empty homes and unanswered questions. Ethan had always considered the tale's campfire folklore until now. Determined to investigate, he reviewed decades of incident reports stored in park archives. Several disappearances shared unusual similarities. Witnesses often reported hearing familiar voices calling from the woods shortly before victims vanished. One report from 1989 described a missing ranger who supposedly returned 3 days after disappearing. The ranger appeared healthy but behaved differently. Co-workers noticed he avoided direct sunlight and rarely blinked. 6 weeks later, he vanished again. Authorities eventually discovered a shallow grave containing what remained of his body. The corpse had been buried before his supposed return. Ethan stared at the old photographs in disbelief. Either the reports were fabricated, or something impossible had happened. His attention shifted to a handwritten note attached to the case file. The final sentence had been underlined several times. It read, "If they come back wearing your face, do not follow them into the trees." Ethan felt a chill spread through his chest. Outside the station window, the forest stood silent beneath the fading afternoon light. For the first time in his career, he wondered if the wilderness was hiding something far older and more dangerous than any predator. 3 days later, another emergency call arrived. A family camping near Raven Creek reported seeing a missing hiker wandering through their campsite shortly after midnight. The man had disappeared nearly a week earlier during the ongoing search operation. Ethan immediately drove to the location. The witnesses described the individual in disturbing detail. He appeared pale and confused but smiled constantly. His clothing matched the missing hiker's description exactly. Most unsettling was his behavior. He repeatedly asked the family to follow him deeper into the forest. When they refused, he stood motionless among the trees for almost 20 minutes, staring silently at their tent. Eventually he walked away without making another sound. Ethan examined the area and found footprints leading toward the restricted valley mentioned in the legends. Several prints looked human. Others did not. Some resembled elongated bare feet with too many joints. The tracks overlapped each other as though multiple beings had moved together.
As Ethan followed the trail, he discovered scraps of human skin hanging from thorn-covered branches. At first he assumed they belonged to an animal attack victim. Then he noticed something horrifying. The skin fragments contained traces of synthetic stitching. Someone, or something, had sewn them together like pieces of clothing. Nearby, a foul odor drifted through the trees. Ethan found a hidden depression in the ground filled with discarded layers of flesh. Human faces stared upward from the pile, empty and expressionless. Many appeared decades old. Some seemed disturbingly fresh. The ranger stumbled backward in shock. Suddenly, a voice echoed from deeper within the woods. It sounded exactly like his younger brother, who had died 10 years earlier. "Ethan," it called softly, "come help me." The voice came again, closer this time. Ethan knew it was impossible, yet against his better judgment, he found himself moving toward the darkness. The voice of Ethan's dead brother echoed through the darkness, pulling him deeper into the forest despite every instinct telling him to turn back. The beam from his flashlight shook as he followed the sound through dense undergrowth. Branches scraped against his jacket while the temperature seemed to drop with every step. The forest around him had become unnaturally silent. No insects, no birds, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, Ethan emerged into a wide valley hidden between steep cliffs. The place did not appear on any official map of Black Pine National Forest. Massive pine trees surrounded the clearing like ancient sentinels, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes. Strange symbols had been carved into the bark centuries ago. In the center of the valley stood dozens of wooden structures resembling crude cabins. Smoke drifted from stone chimneys, suggesting recent activity, yet no people could be seen anywhere. Ethan cautiously approached the nearest cabin. The door stood slightly open. Inside, he discovered furniture covered in dust and decay. The room looked abandoned, yet everything was arranged neatly as though someone still lived there. On the table sat dozens of framed photographs. At first they appeared ordinary family portraits. Then Ethan realized every photograph featured the same individuals wearing different faces. A woman in one picture appeared as a young mother. In another, she wore the face of an elderly man. Children appeared as adults. Adults appeared as strangers. The bodies remained the same, but the faces constantly changed. As he examined the disturbing collection, he heard faint footsteps outside. Peering through the window, Ethan saw figures emerging from the darkness. Dozens of them. They moved slowly between the cabins, illuminated by pale moonlight. Every one of them wore a human face that looked stretched over something not entirely human beneath. Ethan extinguished his flashlight and crouched beneath the cabin window. His heart pounded violently as the figures gathered in the center of the valley. Their movements were synchronized, almost ritualistic. None of them spoke. Instead, they tilted their heads toward the sky as if listening to something far above the clouds. A low humming sound began to fill the air. The noise seemed to come from every direction at once. Ethan carefully observed the creatures through a narrow gap in the wall. Some wore the faces of children. Others wore elderly faces marked with wrinkles and scars. But their eyes remained identical, large, black, and completely emotionless. Suddenly, one of the creatures stepped forward carrying an object wrapped in cloth. It placed the bundle on a stone altar positioned at the center of the clearing. The surrounding figures formed a circle around it and remained perfectly still. The cloth covering the object slowly slipped away. Ethan immediately recognized what lay beneath. It was the body of one of the missing hikers. The young man appeared alive but unconscious. Thin roots extended from the altar into his skin, wrapping around his arms and neck like living veins. The humming sound grew louder. The roots began to pulse rhythmically. Then something emerged from the forest floor beneath the victim. A pale shape slowly rose from the earth. It resembled a featureless humanoid figure made entirely of white flesh. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, The entity climbed onto the altar and leaned over the unconscious hiker. Ethan watched in horror as the creature's smooth face split open vertically. The opening widened into a grotesque cavity lined with hundreds of needle-like teeth. The thing lowered itself over the victim's head. The hiker suddenly awoke and began screaming. The scream echoed across the valley before abruptly stopping. Ethan fought the urge to look away. The faceless creature remained bent over the victim for several seconds while the surrounding figures stood motionless. Then it slowly straightened. The transformation was immediate and horrifying. The entity now possessed the exact face of the missing hiker. Every feature had been perfectly copied. The victim's body, however, remained on the altar. It had become a hollow shell. The skin appeared loose and empty, as though everything beneath it had been removed. Ethan finally understood the truth. These creatures were not disguising themselves with stolen skin alone. They were somehow stealing identities, memories, and personalities. The faces were merely the final layer of imitation. The realization made Ethan physically sick. If these things could perfectly copy a human being, how many had already left the valley? How many were living unnoticed among ordinary people? As Ethan prepared to retreat unnoticed, a sudden voice whispered directly behind him. "You're not supposed to see this." He spun around and nearly dropped his flashlight. Standing inside the cabin was his younger brother, Daniel. The same face. The same clothes he had worn the day he died 10 years earlier. For a brief moment, Ethan's emotions overwhelmed logic. But then he noticed the eyes. They were completely black. Daniel smiled slowly. "We wore him for a while," the thing said softly. The creature took another step forward. "And now we're going to wear you." Outside, every figure in the valley turned simultaneously toward the cabin. Hundreds of black eyes locked onto Ethan's position. The creatures began moving together. Slow at first, then faster. Ethan smashed through the rear window and sprinted into the darkness as the valley erupted with horrifying shrieks. Behind him, dozens of stolen human voices echoed through the trees. Each one called his name. Ethan ran blindly through the darkness as hundreds of stolen voices echoed behind him. Branches whipped across his face while the forest seemed to twist and shift around him. Every direction looked the same. Every path appeared unfamiliar. The creatures were no longer hiding their true nature. Their screams transformed into unnatural sounds that no human throat could produce. Some resembled distorted animal cries. Others sounded like radio static mixed with distant human laughter. Ethan risked a glance behind him and instantly regretted it. The creatures were moving through the trees at impossible speeds. Their bodies bent and stretched unnaturally while the stolen human faces remained fixed in frozen smiles. One of them wore the face of the missing hiker. Another wore the face of his dead brother. Several others appeared to be wearing faces taken decades ago. Their skin looked weathered and cracked, barely holding together as they sprinted through the forest. The valley was far behind him now, but the pursuit showed no sign of slowing. Ethan ran blindly through the darkness as hundreds of stolen voices echoed behind him. Branches whipped across his face while the forest seemed to twist and shift around him. Every direction looked the same. Every path appeared unfamiliar. The creatures were no longer hiding their true nature. Their screams transformed into unnatural sounds that no human throat could produce. Some resembled distorted animal cries. Others sounded like radio static mixed with distant human laughter. Ethan risked a glance behind him and instantly regretted it. The creatures were moving through the trees at impossible speeds. Their bodies bent and stretched unnaturally while the stolen human faces remained fixed in frozen smiles. One of them wore the face of the missing hiker. Another wore the face of his dead brother. Several others appeared to be wearing faces taken decades ago. Their skin looked weathered and cracked, barely holding together as they sprinted through the forest. The valley was far behind him now, but the pursuit showed no sign of slowing. After nearly an hour of running, Ethan stumbled into an abandoned firewatch tower perched on a rocky hill. He slammed the door shut and climbed to the observation room. The creatures gathered below but did not attempt to climb. Instead, they surrounded the tower and stared upward. Their black eyes reflected the pale moonlight. As dawn approached, something unexpected happened. The creatures began retreating into the forest. Within minutes, they had vanished completely. Exhausted and shaken, Ethan searched the tower for supplies. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, he discovered a rusted metal box containing journals dating back nearly 70 years. They belonged to a former ranger named Samuel Hart. The first pages described disappearances similar to those Ethan was investigating. But as he continued reading, the entries became increasingly disturbing. Samuel claimed the creatures were not native to Earth. According to his notes, they had been sleeping beneath black pine forest for thousands of years, long before human civilization existed. The journals revealed a horrifying history buried beneath decades of missing person reports. Samuel Hart had spent 20 years investigating the valley and documenting everything he learned. According to his research, local indigenous legends spoke of beings called the Borrowers. They were described as ancient creatures that arrived from the stars before humanity existed. The entities possessed no fixed form of their own. Instead, they survived by copying intelligent life. Over centuries they remained hidden underground, occasionally emerging to observe human settlements. At first, they merely mimicked behavior from a distance. But as civilization expanded, their curiosity evolved into obsession. They wanted more than appearances. They wanted memories, emotions, identities, and experiences. They believed that by collecting enough human lives, they could eventually become something greater than the species they imitated. Samuel's final entries suggested the creatures had been preparing for a massive emergence event. Something beneath the valley was awakening. As Ethan turned the final pages, a folded map slipped onto the floor. It showed an extensive network of tunnels beneath Black Pine National Forest. At the center of the underground labyrinth was a location labeled only as the Heart Chamber. Samuel had circled the area repeatedly and written a warning beside it. Do not let it wake. The next page contained a hand-drawn illustration unlike anything Ethan had seen before. The image depicted an enormous organic structure buried deep underground. It resembled a gigantic eye fused into stone and roots. Thousands of tunnels extended outward from it like veins. Samuel believed the skin-wearing creatures were merely extensions of a much larger organism sleeping beneath the forest. Every copied human identity was being collected and stored within the entity's mind. Ethan suddenly understood why the creatures stole people instead of simply killing them. They were feeding information to something ancient below. Every memory, every fear, every human experience was being gathered for a purpose still unknown. Determined to stop whatever was awakening beneath Black Pine, Ethan followed Samuel's map toward the Heart Chamber. By late afternoon, he reached the entrance to a hidden cave concealed behind a waterfall. The opening descended deep underground. The air inside felt unnaturally warm. Strange pulsing sounds echoed through the darkness like a massive heartbeat. Ethan activated his flashlight and began descending. The tunnel walls appeared smooth and organic rather than natural stone. In some places, they seemed almost alive. Vein-like structures pulsed beneath translucent surfaces. The deeper he traveled, the stronger the sensation became that he was walking inside a living organism. Several hours later, the tunnel opened into a cavern so vast that his flashlight could not reveal its boundaries. Thousands of cocoon-like pods hung from the ceiling. Human faces pressed outward from inside translucent membranes. Some appeared alive. Others seemed frozen in silent terror. At the center of the chamber stood the impossible structure from Samuel's drawings. The gigantic eye was real. It towered hundreds of feet above the cavern floor, partially fused with roots, stone, and flesh. The iris slowly rotated as though dreaming. Every few seconds, whispers emerged from it. Thousands of voices speaking simultaneously. Ethan recognized fragments of conversations, memories, and names. The stolen identities were trapped inside. Suddenly, the enormous eye opened fully. The cavern trembled. A voice entered Ethan's mind. Not spoken, remembered. We have watched your kind for 10,000 years. The eye focused directly on him. We are almost ready. Across the chamber, thousands of cocoons began opening, and every person inside stepped out smiling. The cavern shook violently as thousands of cocoons split open across the vast underground chamber. Ethan stood frozen beneath the enormous eye while the newly awakened figures stepped onto the cavern floor. At first glance, they appeared completely human. Men, women, children, even elderly people emerged from the translucent pods. Some wore clothing from different decades. Others were dressed in ranger uniforms, hiking gear, or ordinary civilian clothes. Ethan recognized several faces from missing person posters that had circulated throughout Black Pine National Forest over the years. For a brief moment, hope surged through him. Perhaps these people had somehow survived. Perhaps they could still be rescued. Then one of them looked directly at him and smiled. The expression never reached its eyes. More faces turned toward him. Thousands of identical smiles spread across the chamber. The whispers filling the air grew louder. Every voice belonged to someone who had disappeared inside the forest. Yet all of them spoke the same sentence simultaneously. We remember being human. The crowd began moving forward in perfect unison. Ethan backed away, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. The enormous eye rotated slowly overhead, observing everything. Memories suddenly flooded Ethan's mind. Images flashed before him with impossible speed. He saw explorers vanishing into the forest centuries ago. He saw settlers disappearing from isolated cabins. He saw entire groups of people being taken beneath black pine and absorbed into the ancient organism's collective consciousness. The borrowers had not merely copied humanity. They had been studying and collecting it for thousands of years. Every stolen memory became part of a growing archive. Every captured identity strengthened the sleeping intelligence beneath the forest. The eye's voice returned to Ethan's thoughts. You call yourselves individuals. We call you ingredients. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Humanity was not their target. It was their raw material. Ethan fled deeper into the cavern as the smiling figures followed. Their movements remained unnaturally coordinated. None of them ran, yet they never seemed to fall behind. Following Samuel Hart's map, Ethan searched desperately for any weakness within the underground complex. Eventually, he discovered a narrow tunnel leading toward the roots connected to the giant eye. The passage descended even deeper beneath the earth. The pulsing heartbeat grew louder with every step. The walls now resembled living tissue more than stone. Veins the size of tree trunks carried glowing fluid through the darkness. Ethan realized he was approaching the true body of the organism. The eye was only a small, visible portion of something far larger. As he entered a massive chamber below, he finally understood the scale of the horror hidden beneath black pine. The forest above existed atop an ancient biological structure stretching for miles underground. The entire region was part of the creature. At the center of the chamber stood a formation resembling a giant organic heart. The structure expanded and contracted rhythmically. Thick roots extended from it in every direction, connecting to the countless tunnels and cocoons above. Embedded within the fleshy surface were thousands of human faces. Some appeared asleep. Others silently screamed. Ethan approached cautiously and noticed something shocking. Many of the trapped faces were still conscious. Their eyes moved. Their mouths formed desperate words. One face belonged to Samuel Hart, the ranger who had written the journals decades earlier. His expression twisted with terror as he mouthed a warning. "Burn it." The heartbeat suddenly accelerated. The faces began screaming simultaneously. Far above, the giant eye opened wider. And somewhere beyond the cavern, sirens echoed from the forest. The borrowers had already reached the surface. Ethan raced back toward the upper tunnels, determined to warn the outside world. But when he finally emerged from the cave entrance after nightfall, he discovered he was already too late. The forest no longer looked normal. Hundreds of people were walking silently between the trees. Families, campers, rangers, search and rescue teams. They moved in identical patterns, staring toward the distant lights of nearby towns. Their faces appeared human, but Ethan knew what they truly were. During the previous 24 hours, the borrowers had spread far beyond the hidden valley. They had infiltrated rescue operations, emergency services, and nearby communities. Anyone entering Black Pine in search of the missing hikers had unknowingly become part of the harvest. Vehicles sat abandoned along forest roads. Radios crackled with frantic messages. Reports of strange behavior were arriving from neighboring counties. Entire neighborhoods had begun reporting loved ones acting differently, smiling constantly, speaking in rehearsed sentences, forgetting emotional connections. Ethan reached a ranger station and activated emergency communications. Yet every channel carried the same horrifying message. Voices from across the region repeated identical phrases. We are learning. We are becoming. "We are almost ready." Then every screen inside the station flickered. Security cameras from nearby towns displayed crowds gathering in streets and public squares. Thousands of people stood motionless while staring upward into the night sky. Ethan followed their gaze through a window. Above Black Pine Forest, the stars were disappearing. Not because of clouds. Something enormous was moving beyond the atmosphere. Something ancient. Something that had finally received enough information from the borrowers below. The giant eye beneath the forest had never been the true threat. It was only a transmitter, and whatever had answered its signal was now arriving. The stars continued disappearing one by one above Black Pine Forest. Ethan stood motionless inside the ranger station, staring into the impossible darkness spreading across the night sky. News broadcasts from around the world flooded emergency channels. Astronomers reported a massive object entering the solar system, yet no telescope could properly focus on it. The closer it approached, the more distorted the images became. Some scientists described it as a moving void. Others claimed it appeared alive. Entire observatories suddenly went offline after researchers suffered nervous breakdowns while studying it. Meanwhile, the borrowers continued gathering in towns and cities across the region. Thousands stood silently in streets, parking lots, and open fields. They all faced the sky. Their black eyes reflected the growing darkness above. Ethan listened as emergency operators desperately attempted to coordinate responses. Every call carried the same message. More people were changing. More people were disappearing. The harvest was accelerating. Then the giant eye beneath Black Pine opened completely. The earth trembled. Across every television screen, computer monitor, and phone display, the same image appeared without explanation. A colossal shape moved through deep space. Its true form could not be comprehended. Human perception translated it differently for every observer. Some saw an endless eye. Others saw a skeletal universe-sized creature. Many saw something resembling a living storm made of darkness and stars. Yet all descriptions shared one horrifying detail. The entity was looking directly at Earth. Ethan felt a crushing pressure inside his mind. Memories that were not his own flooded his thoughts. He witnessed civilizations on distant worlds being studied, copied, and consumed. Entire species had vanished after encountering the intelligence approaching Earth. The borrowers were not invaders. They were scouts, and humanity was only the latest entry in an ancient collection. The archive is complete. The subject is understood. Preparation has ended. At that exact moment, every stolen memory collected over thousands of years flowed into the ancient intelligence beyond the stars. Humanity's entire history, every war, every invention, every fear, every dream, was transmitted through the giant eye beneath Black Pine. Ethan felt the connection as a wave of overwhelming emotion passed through the world. For an instant, every human being experienced fragments of everyone else's memories. People collapsed in confusion. Some screamed. Others wept. Entire populations witnessed the collective history of their species in a single unbearable moment. The ancient intelligence absorbed it all. Then the true purpose of the harvest was revealed. Humanity had never been selected for destruction. It had been selected for replication. The approaching intelligence did not conquer civilizations. It preserved them, in its own horrifying way. Across the planet, borrowers began shedding their stolen skins. Human faces split apart and fell away. Beneath them emerged pale, featureless forms. Millions of them looked toward the heavens as massive columns of light descended from the darkened sky. The beams enveloped entire cities. Buildings, roads, vehicles, and people slowly dissolved into glowing particles. Yet nothing was being destroyed. Every atom, memory, and experience was being copied into the ancient archive. Earth itself was becoming a record, a museum specimen stored within a cosmic collection spanning countless galaxies. Ethan realized the terrifying truth. The intelligence believed it was saving humanity. As the process spread across the planet, Ethan returned to the hidden valley where everything had begun. The giant eye towered above the forest, now fully exposed as the ground around it collapsed. Trees fell into enormous sinkholes leading to the living structure below. The sky had become almost completely black. Only a handful of stars remained visible. Around the eye stood thousands of borrowers, watching silently as the final transmission continued. Ethan knew there was no stopping it. Humanity had already been copied. The archive was complete. Yet one question still haunted him. What happened to the originals? The answer came moments later. The giant eye focused directly on him. And for the first time, it spoke aloud. You fear ending. You misunderstand. The eye opened wider. Inside its pupil, Ethan saw impossible landscapes stretching into infinity. Entire civilizations lived within those realms. Species that should have been extinct continued existing inside vast artificial realities preserved by the cosmic intelligence. Some appeared content. Others wandered endlessly through perfect recreations of worlds long gone. Humanity's future waited among them. Ethan suddenly found himself standing somewhere else. A forest. Black pine forest. But different. The sky was brighter. The air felt warmer. Nearby, hikers laughed around a campfire. Children played beside a river. Families explored trails untouched by fear. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. As Ethan looked closer, he noticed subtle imperfections. Birds repeated the same flight patterns. Leaves fell along identical paths. Smiles lingered a fraction too long. This world was a copy. A perfect simulation stored within the archive. The last thing Ethan saw before the real universe disappeared forever was a sign standing beside the trail. Welcome to Black Pine Preserve. Archive specimen #7 for 83,992. Status: successfully saved. And somewhere beyond the simulation, something ancient continued searching the stars for its next civilization to preserve.